For the past 6 nights, my world has shrunk down to the 4 walls of my bedroom, and every single morning, the same unholy routine plays out. At exactly 3:33 a.m., a wail that sounds like it's clawing its way up from hell itself rips me out of my sleep. And when the sound finally dies away, there's a new rule glistening on my wall, written in something that looks and smells like blood. I'm on rule number 6 now, and I have this chilling certainty that breaking even one of them will end in a disaster far worse than a rude awakening. My life has become a prison sentence, served one terrifying rule at a time, and I have no idea what crime I'm supposed to have committed. All I know is I have to follow them. I have to survive. It all started 6 nights ago. I went to bed like any other night. The day had been completely normal. Work, dinner, some mindless TV. Nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. My alarm clock flashed 3:33 a.m. when the sound first tore through the silence of my apartment. It wasn't just a scream. It was a wail. A long, drawn-out guttural cry of pure, undiluted agony. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. From inside my closet, from under my bed, from the very air around me. It vibrated in my bones, a resonant frequency of absolute terror that left me paralyzed right where I lay. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the soul-shattering cry. I jammed my eyes shut, convinced I was having the world's most vivid and horrifying nightmare. The wail held for what felt like an eternity, a single, unwavering note of despair. Then, just as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence that came after was somehow heavier, more profound than before. It was a silence that felt watchful. I lay there for minutes, maybe an hour, my body rigid, every muscle screaming in protest. I didn't dare move. I just listened to the frantic thumping of my own heart, waiting for the sound to come back. Slowly, as the first hints of dawn began to creep through my blinds, I found the courage to open my eyes. The room was exactly as I'd left it. My clothes were slung over a chair. A book lay face down on my nightstand. It was all so agonizingly normal that for one blissful second, I thought it had all been a dream. A trick of a mind still foggy with sleep. Then I saw it. On the wall opposite my bed, in letters that dripped with a dark, wet crimson, were 5 words. The script was elegant, almost calligraphic, a sick joke compared to the horrific medium. It smelled coppery, like a fresh wound. The words read, "Do not open your eyes until dawn." It was the first rule. I didn't understand. I just stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I stumbled out of bed and reached out to touch it. The substance was thick, sticky, and cold. It was blood. I recoiled, scrubbing my fingers on my pajama pants as a wave of nausea washed over me. I spent the rest of the day in a state of shock, trying to convince myself I was losing my mind, that I had hallucinated the whole thing. I even tried to scrub the words off the wall, but the bloody letters wouldn't fade. They just smeared, turning a section of my beige wall into a sickening rusty brown stain, the words still legible underneath. That evening, I went to bed with every light in the apartment on, my body thrumming with a fear I had never known. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a stress-induced hallucination. I was so wrong. The second night was worse because this time I was expecting it. I lay awake for hours, watching the clock tick past midnight, then 1, then 2. As 3 o'clock rolled around, my body went rigid with anticipation. My heart rate shot up, my palms slick with sweat. And right on cue, at 3:33 a.m., the wail came again. The same soul-shredding cry of eternal torment, and it was no less terrifying the second time around. This time, I knew what to do. The first rule, still faintly visible on my wall, echoed in my mind. Do not open your eyes until dawn. I clamped my eyelids shut so tightly my head ached. I buried my face in my pillow, trying to muffle the sound, but it was useless. It was already inside my head. The temptation to open my eyes was overwhelming. A primal urge to see what was making the sound, to confront the thing that was tormenting me. But the rule held me captive. I imagined shadows in the corners of the room growing long, reaching for me. I felt a cold draft sweep over my skin, even though the window was shut. I could hear faint scratching sounds, like long fingernails dragging across the wooden floor just beyond the edge of my bed. I thought I would go mad, lying there in the self-imposed darkness, my imagination running wild with the horrors that might be unfolding just beyond my eyelids. But I held on. I didn't peek. When dawn finally broke, painting thin strips of light across my room, I cautiously opened my eyes. My body was drenched in a cold sweat. I scanned the room, my gaze frantic. And there it was. Below the first rule, a new line had appeared, written in the same fresh, dripping blood. Rule number 2. Speak no words after the wail. My breath hitched. First, it took my sight. Now it was taking my voice. It was isolating me, stripping away my senses one by one. I spent the day in a daze, the silence in my apartment feeling more like a threat than a comfort. Who could I possibly tell? How could I explain this without sounding insane? Hi, yes, a ghost is leaving me bloody instructions on my wall every night. They'd have me committed in a heartbeat. The wail, the rules. This was a secret I had to keep. A terror I had to face alone. Night 3 arrived with a whole new kind of dread. Now I had 2 rules to follow. Lie motionless in the dark and remain utterly silent. The clock hit 3:33 a.m., and the wail ripped through my room. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting my lip so hard I tasted my own blood to stifle the scream building in my throat. I wanted to yell, to shout, to make any noise that would prove I still existed, that I hadn't been swallowed whole by the oppressive sound and the suffocating darkness. But the second rule was a chain on my vocal cords. This time, the other sounds in the room were different. It wasn't just scratching. I heard a soft, wet sound, like something being dragged, and a faint, almost inaudible whispering. It was too low to make out any words, but the cadence was hypnotic, chilling. It felt like it was right next to my ear. I flinched, pulling the covers tighter around me, my silent scream trapped in my chest. This time, the silence after the wail felt even more menacing. I lay there, my own blood on my lips, my eyes screwed shut, listening to the phantom whispers fade. As the sun rose, I finally let myself look. There, on the wall, beneath the first 2 rules, was the third. Cover all mirrors before sleep. My blood ran cold. My bedroom has a large floor-length mirror on the closet door. I'd been sleeping with it uncovered for the last 2 nights. What had it seen? What had been reflected in its surface while I lay there, blind and silent? The thought made my stomach turn. Had the creature, whatever it was, stood there, watching me? Had it looked at its own reflection? The third rule felt like a taunt, a confirmation that something had been in the room with me. That night, before getting into bed, I took a heavy blanket and draped it over the mirror, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it up. The covered mirror looked like a shrouded corpse in the corner of my room. By the fourth night, the rules began to invade not just my room, but my mind. I followed the first 3 rules like my life depended on it. The mirror was covered. My eyes were shut tight. My lips were sealed. The wail came at 3:33 a.m., punctual as always. But this time, the torment followed me into my sleep. After the wail faded, I must have drifted off. I dreamt I was in a beautiful, sun-drenched meadow. The fear from my waking life was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. A figure approached me. It was my mother, who had passed away years ago. She looked young, healthy, and she was smiling. She held out a bright red apple, polished to a perfect shine. "You look so tired," she said, her voice filled with love. "Eat this. It will give you strength." The dream felt so real. The warmth of the sun, the smell of the grass, the loving look in my mother's eyes. I was starving, not just for food, but for comfort, for an escape. I reached for the apple, my fingers just inches away. But as I did, I felt a sudden sharp chill. The same cold I felt in my room when the wail came. A warning bell went off deep in my mind. This was a trick. I pulled my hand back. "No," I said in the dream. My mother's face fell. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of deep, sorrowful disappointment. Then her face began to change. Her eyes sank into their sockets, her skin turned gray and waxy, and her lips peeled back to reveal blackened, rotten teeth. The apple in her hand crumbled to dust. The beautiful meadow dissolved around me, replaced by the suffocating darkness of my bedroom. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. The sun was up. I scrambled out of bed and looked at the wall. The fourth rule was there, glistening darkly. Eat nothing offered in dreams. It knew. It had tried to trick me, to feed me, and I had almost fallen for it. What would have happened if I had eaten that apple? The thought was terrifying. This thing wasn't content to just torment me when I was awake. It was now seeping into my subconscious, turning my own memories and desires against me. My own mind was no longer a safe place. By the 5th night, I was a wreck. Barely sleeping, barely eating. My life was just a cycle of dread, terror, and exhaustion. I felt like a prisoner on death row. That night, after covering the mirror, I practically collapsed into bed. I was so tired. I just wanted it all to end. 3:33 a.m. The wail. Louder this time, more desperate. It was a sound that promised violence. I shut my eyes. I kept my mouth shut. I prayed for a dreamless sleep. But the sounds in the room were worse than ever. I heard scraping, not on the floor, but on the door to my bedroom. Loud, insistent scratching. Then, a voice. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman from across the hall. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. "Is everything all right in there? I heard a terrible noise." Her voice was muffled by the door, but it was unmistakably hers. My first, most human instinct was to get up, run to the door, open it, and beg for her help. I could tell her everything. She would call the police. This nightmare would finally end. I started to sit up, my hand outstretched towards the doorknob. But then I froze. The timing was too perfect. The wail had just ended, and the voice was coming from the other side of my door. My eyes darted to the clock. It was still 3:33. I fell back onto the bed, shaking with a new kind of fear. It was another trick. It had to be. It was using the voice of my kind, elderly neighbor to lure me out. I stayed in bed, paralyzed, listening as the voice called my name over and over, growing more and more distressed. I heard a rattling at the doorknob. It was trying to get in, or it was trying to get me to come out. I lay there until the sun came up, listening to the phantom calls and the rattling doorknob. When I finally got up, my legs were weak. I looked at the wall, and the fifth rule confirmed my fears. Never touch the door at 3:33. I felt a surge of cold terror, followed by a wave of relief. I had almost broken the rule. I had come so close. What would have happened if I had opened that door? Would I have found Mrs. Gable? Or would I have found the thing that makes the wail waiting for me with open arms? I shuddered, and for the first time, I think I truly understood. These weren't just rules. They were survival instructions. And that brings me to tonight. Or rather this morning. Just a few hours ago, the wail woke me for the 6th time. I've gotten used to the fear, in a way. It's a familiar weight in my gut, a cold companion that never leaves. I went through the motions. Eyes shut, mouth shut, don't move. I heard nothing but the wail's echo in my own mind. When the sun rose, I steeled myself and looked at the wall. But this time, it was different. There was no new line of blood on the wall. For a confusing, hopeful moment, I thought it might be over. Maybe I had passed some kind of test. Maybe 6 nights was all the torture I had to endure. Then I saw it. On my pillow, right next to where my head had been, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was yellowed and brittle, like it was ancient. And it was stained with the same dark, drying blood as the messages on the wall. My hands trembled as I reached for it. It felt cold to the touch. I unfolded it. Inside, written in the same elegant, terrifying script, was the 6th rule. Burn this paper at midnight or join us. This was different. This was an ultimatum. All the other rules had been passive. Don't look, don't speak, don't eat, don't touch. They were about not doing something. But this was a command. It required me to act. It gave me a deadline. Midnight. And it came with a stated consequence, the first one to be spelled out so clearly. Or join us. Join who? The thing that wails in the dark? The thing that scribbles its bloody commandments on my walls? The thought is so horrifying I can barely breathe. To become one of them? To be the source of that unholy sound? It's a fate worse than death. The paper is sitting on my desk now. I can't stop looking at it. The blood seems to shift in the light, the words almost pulsating. It feels like a living thing, a parasite that has invaded my home and my life. I have until midnight. A few hours left to figure out how to burn this cursed thing. But fear is coiling in my stomach, tighter and tighter. This feels like a turning point. It feels like a trap. What happens when I burn it? Does the curse end? Or does burning it just trigger something else? The rules have never offered an escape. They have only offered survival, one night at a time. Why would that change now? The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of my life. The sun set, plunging my apartment into shadows that seemed to writhe and dance in the corners of my vision. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. I paced the length of my small living room, the blood-stained paper clutched in my sweaty hand. Burn this paper at midnight. The words were seared into my brain. My apartment doesn't have a fireplace. My only options were the gas stove or a lighter. I settled on the kitchen sink. It felt safer, more contained. I found a book of matches in a junk drawer, the cardboard flimsy and soft from age. As 11:50 p.m. rolled around, I stood over the stainless steel basin, my heart a frantic, irregular drum against my ribs. The piece of paper felt impossibly heavy. The ultimatum echoed in my thoughts. Or join us. Join the wailing. The thought sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I would not become one of them. I would burn the paper. I would follow the rule. I watched the clock on the microwave. 11:57. 11:58. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, a fine tremor that started in my fingers and radiated up my arms. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came in ragged, shallow gasps. I held the paper over the sink, my other hand fumbling with the matchbook. 11:59, 30 seconds to go. I tore a match from the book. My fingers were so slick with sweat I could barely get a grip. 20 seconds. I struck the match. It fizzled and died. Panic seized me. 10 seconds. I tore another match out, my movements clumsy and frantic. I scraped it hard against the book. It flared to life, a tiny defiant spear of light in the darkness of my kitchen. 5 seconds. 4. 3. I brought the flame to the edge of the paper. My hand was spasming, my entire body convulsing with a violent tremor of pure terror. Just as the clock was about to tick over to midnight, my hand jerked, a spasm I couldn't control. The corner of the paper dipped into the flame. It was 11:59 and 59 seconds. Not midnight. Not exactly. The paper didn't just burn. It erupted. A flash of incandescent green light exploded from the small scrap, so bright it bleached all the color from the room. I cried out and shielded my eyes, the afterimage seared onto my retinas. The match flew from my fingers, and the room was plunged back into darkness. But I was not alone. A cold, visceral force slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't a physical blow, but an invasion. A presence, ancient and full of malice, flooded my mind, my very being. It was like being drowned in ice water. My thoughts were no longer my own. My memories were being rifled through, examined, and tasted by this other. I stumbled back from the sink, clutching my head. A scream was building in my throat, but the sound that came out was not my own. It was a distorted, dual-toned shriek, half my voice, half something else. Something deep and guttural and full of ageless pain. My eyes felt like they were on fire. I stumbled into the bathroom, fumbling for the light switch. I stared at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror, a mirror I hadn't been told to cover. My face was pale, streaked with tears, but my eyes held the true horror. My pupils were dilated, swallowing the blue of my irises, but from the corners, tiny, thread-like rivulets of blood were beginning to leak, tracing paths down my cheeks like crimson tears. The rule was broken, not by defiance, but by fear, by a single trembling second. And the disaster was here. The disaster was inside me. The pressure in my head was building, a crushing weight. I felt my own consciousness, my own self being pushed down, suppressed, smothered by the cold, vast presence that now shared my body. Then I heard it. The wail. But it wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the air around me. It was starting in my own chest, a low, vibrating hum that grew in intensity, clawing its way up my throat. I opened my mouth, and the sound that had haunted my nights for a week poured out of me. It was my voice, and it was not my voice. It was a chorus of agony, and I was its choir. I had joined them. The wail tore out of me for what felt like forever. My throat was raw, my body convulsing with the force of it. It was an out-of-body experience. I was just a passenger, trapped behind the eyes of a monster wearing my face. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, my body trembling with exhaustion and the lingering alien vibration. The cold presence in my mind receded. It wasn't gone, just dormant, lying in wait. I crawled back to my bedroom, my limbs feeling heavy and disconnected. The bloody rules on the wall seemed to mock me. I had followed them all, until the very last one. And 1 second of failure had cost me everything. I don't know how long I lay on the floor. I waited for the dawn, but the sun brought no comfort this time. I was changed. I could feel it. A cold spot in the center of my soul that would never be warm again. The next night, I lay in bed, filled with a different kind of dread. What would happen at 3:33 a.m.? Would I wail again? Would a new rule appear? I watched the clock, my body rigid. 3:32, 3:33, 3:34. Silence. No wail, no new rule, nothing. The silence was absolute, deeper than it had ever been. For a single fleeting moment, I dared to hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe the price for breaking the rule was that single horrifying episode of possession. Maybe I was free. But the coldness inside me stirred. A thought, not my own, slid into my mind. The wall is empty. Then I felt it, a compulsion, an irresistible urge that started in my mind and flowed down my arm, into my hand. My body moved without my consent. I got out of bed, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked to the wall where the rules had appeared night after night. I raised my hand. My own finger, guided by the thing inside me, pressed against the cool plaster. I watched, horrified, as it began to drag across the wall, leaving a faint scratch-like trail. There was no blood, not yet. But the intent was there. The compulsion to write, to create a new rule. The cycle wasn't broken. It had just been passed on. The previous entity, whatever it was, had found its replacement. It had found its escape. And I was the new jailer. I was the new monster. The wailing had stopped because the source of the wail was no longer outside. It was inside me. My hand drops to my side, the compulsion fading. For now, I am no longer just the victim of this curse. I am its instrument. The terror of waiting for the next rule has been replaced by the horror of knowing that I will be the one to write it. The silence in my apartment is no longer a reprieve. It is a waiting game. Waiting for the next 3:33 a.m. Waiting for the wail that will come from my own lungs. The wailing has stopped, but a new sound has started. It's the quiet, rhythmic scratching of my own fingernails against the plaster of my bedroom wall. And as I feel the urge building inside me again, I have to wonder, whose name will I have to write tonight? And what will their first rule be? If you made it through this and you want to hear more stories from the dark, make sure you're subscribed. And check out the other tales of terror I have waiting for you. Just be careful. You never know what rules you might end up having to follow.